priests, the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on earthly, divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in his glory and the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
We've all been there. We receive news that is so devastating that our first reaction is denial. We say, "No, that can't be true. There must be some mistake. We'll figure out what's really going on and find a way to work with that. But this thing you've just told me, that can't possibly be right." Are you thinking of your own experiences? A medical diagnosis that'll alter your life forever, the sudden, unexpected death of a loved one, the end of a marriage, or a child's horrific decision that will have consequences that they are too young to wrap their minds around. Devastating blows in whatever form often take time to process, usually lots of time to process. And denial is a perfectly natural reaction at the beginning, but we can't stay in that place of denial. Last week at our Sunday evening Lenten program, we talked about denial and how powerful it can be in many different facets of our lives, including our lives of faith. Denial is often an unconscious response. After all, the only way to realize that we are in denial about something is to come out of the denial and to recognize the truth of whatever it is that we've been denying. Usually, denial is a response to fear. We don't want whatever it is going on or being predicted to be true because the consequences of that frighten us. Sometimes denial is full and immediate, like what I just described, but other times it's slow and ongoing over an extended period of time. A person learns that their partner has advanced cancer, but insists that they'll be fine. They put on a happy face and pretend like everything's okay, while the partner sits alone in his or her grief and fear. Or a parent learns that their teenager is using drugs and says, "Oh, everybody experiments at some point in time. He won't let it get out of hand," while the teen begins using more and more dangerous drugs at higher and higher doses. A disciple hears Jesus say that eventually he's going to be killed for proclaiming the message that he is proclaiming, and insists that this cannot be. We all engage in various forms of denial throughout our lives, so perhaps today we can give Peter and Jesus' other followers a little slack. as long as we realize that we also walk right alongside them. This morning, in our second Sunday of Lent, we encounter Jesus' own prediction of his death and resurrection. This is the first of 3 times that Jesus predicts his passion in Mark, and each time the disciples react with various forms of denial. They represent both forms of denial that we've been talking about, the sudden and the immediate, but also this long, drawn-out denial as they continue to ignore Jesus' predictions. But here in this first prediction, Peter's response is sudden. He pulls Jesus aside and rebukes him. I imagine him saying, No, that's not right. I can't believe what you're telling me. We're told that Jesus made these predictions of his death and resurrection quite openly to people who had come to hear him speak. This is not something that he was just revealing to his disciples. Jesus wasn't in denial about his future at all, and he had no qualms about sharing it. But Peter hears Jesus' words, and he pulls him aside, away from the crowds, to rebuke him. I imagine him saying something like, Jesus, you can't just say that. You're not going to die anytime soon, and claiming that you're going to be killed and resurrected is only going to stir people up, so please stop saying things like that. But Jesus, continuing to keep the conversation semi-private, just amongst the disciples, then turns and rebukes Peter. He says, Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Jesus' rebuke of Peter has always struck me as very harsh, and he calls him Satan. This reference is not meant to be literal, of course, but rather to place heavy emphasis on the force of the rebuke. What comes after is the real message. Peter has set his mind on earthly things, thinking that what he's experiencing here and now, traveling with and learning from Jesus, won't ever change. He's not remaining open to divine things, to the idea that there could be something greater going on here than he could know or understand. But wouldn't we all do the same thing that Peter did? I mean, really, if we were with Jesus, watching his ministry take off, learning from him, enjoying his friendship, and suddenly he said that he's going to be killed and resurrected, wouldn't you try to tell him that that can't be true? I probably would have. Jesus sees in Peter a microcosm of what's likely going on amongst all who are listening, though. Remember, he made his passion prediction very openly to the crowd that had gathered to hear him. So he turns back to that crowd and warns them of the cost of following him. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Jesus not only corrects Peter, he makes sure that all those who are around him understand that when he predicted his death, he was serious. Today, we often interpret this verse metaphorically, to take up your cross and follow Jesus. But at that point in time, people really did follow Jesus into death. By the time that Mark wrote his gospel, his original audience would have known of other followers of Jesus who did experience persecution and death, probably some within their own community. So this passage can be read on multiple levels. It was directed at both Jesus' audience while he was here on earth, but also at the audience of the early church who was reading and hearing Jesus' words anew. The next lines that Jesus speaks are also aimed at dual audiences. He says, "Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Living as we do, as the recipients of 2,000 years of Christian history, In a country where Christianity is still the dominant religion, we often forget the scandal of the cross. That Jesus was crucified was a major point of shame for the early Christians. Their leader, whom they proclaimed as Messiah, had been killed in the way of a criminal, an insurrectionist. And this was very difficult for people to wrap their minds around. How can Jesus be both Messiah and crucified? When you combine this with some of the more difficult sayings and teachings of Jesus, you can understand how even faithful followers would struggle as they got into debates with non-Christians. Jesus warns that not only do his followers need to be willing to physically profess their faith through their actions, but they also must not be ashamed of him and his words. He's asking for full commitment here, body, mind, and spirit, and he asks the same of us today. We usually like to focus on the uplifting parts of the gospel most of the time, but we often do this to the denial of the horror and pain that Jesus experienced. We, like Peter, tend to operate with some level of denial. We face the cross and deal with the suffering of Jesus only occasionally. We're Easter people, resurrection people. The temptation is to use Easter to escape Lent and Good Friday, though. Jesus clearly doesn't want this. He wants us to be willing to face the pain and the heartache and to stand firm in our faith. So this is our challenge during this season of Lent. We must examine ourselves to find out where our own denial lies. We must pray with passages like this and others that startle us and convict us and make us wonder if we're really ready to take up our cross and follow Jesus, if we're willing to stand up and proclaim him in our own lives. Lent isn't meant to be easy. It's meant to make us face our own human frailty head on, as we closely examine our lives, our temptations, and our relationship with God. In these upcoming weeks, may we move away from denial and toward a deeper belief in Christ.